"Don't drag me away!" German woman screamed, as Americans lifted her onto a stretcher. April 23rd, 1945. 5:30 in the morning. Herzberg, Germany. The acrid smell of smoke still hung over the cobblestone streets as 29-year-old Elsa Müller pressed herself against the cold stone wall of her cellar, listening to the rumble of American trucks entering her village. For 3 days, she had hidden in the darkness, surviving on stale bread and rainwater collected in a rusted bucket. The propaganda broadcasts she had heard throughout the war echoed in her mind. American soldiers were brutal occupiers. They showed no mercy to German civilians. Women especially had everything to fear. The stories spread through villages like wildfire. Soviet troops advancing from the east had committed unspeakable acts. The Americans, she had been told, would be no different. The Nazi Party officials who fled westward 2 weeks earlier warned that capture meant certain death or worse. Elsa had believed every word. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The cellar door crashed open. Daylight flooded the darkness, and Elsa screamed, throwing her hands over her face. Heavy boots descended the wooden stairs. She heard voices speaking English, the harsh sounds of the enemy language she had been taught to hate since childhood. This was the end. Everything she feared was about to happen. "Ma'am, we're not going to hurt you." The voice was deep, calm, and spoke German with a strange accent. Elsa squinted through her fingers at the figure approaching. He was an American soldier, but not what she expected. His skin was dark, his uniform crisp despite the chaos of war. He held his rifle pointed down, non-threatening. Sergeant James Taylor, 34 years old, veteran of campaigns from Normandy to the Rhine, had seen this terror before. German civilians expecting monsters discovered human beings instead. He had learned to move slowly, speak softly, and let his actions prove what his words could not. Behind him, Private Samuel Lewis, 22, descended the stairs carrying a canteen and a first aid kit. "You're injured," Sammy said in broken German, pointing to Elsa's leg. She looked down and saw what adrenaline had hidden from her awareness. A deep gash ran from her knee to her ankle, probably from the bombing 3 nights earlier. The wound was infected, red and swollen, and she suddenly felt the throbbing pain that had been waiting to be acknowledged. "We need to get you medical attention," Sergeant Taylor said. He gestured to 2 other soldiers who appeared at the cellar entrance. Corporal William Washington, 28, and Private First Class Marcus Johnson, 25, carried a canvas stretcher between them. All 4 men were black American soldiers of the 761st Tank Battalion, part of the occupation force securing the region. When the soldiers approached with the stretcher, something inside Elsa broke. Every piece of propaganda, every fear crystallized into pure panic. As they lifted her gently onto the canvas, she thrashed against their hands, her voice raw with terror. "Don't drag me away!" she screamed in German, her fingernails clawing at the dirt floor. "Don't drag me away, please! Kill me here! Don't take me!" The soldiers froze. Sergeant Taylor raised his hand, and the men carefully lowered the stretcher. He knelt beside Elsa, his face level with hers, his eyes showing no anger at her resistance, only understanding. "We're taking you to a doctor," he said quietly. "That's all. Just a doctor. You have my word." Elsa stared at him, chest heaving, tears streaming down her dirt-covered face. This was not how enemies behaved. These were not the monsters she had been promised. But 12 years of Nazi indoctrination could not be erased by one moment of kindness. She did not believe him. She could not believe him. Yet she had no choice. As the soldiers lifted the stretcher again, more gently this time, Elsa closed her eyes and waited for whatever horrors would come next. The American medical tent stood at the edge of Hertzburg, a canvas structure marked with red crosses that meant nothing to Elsa. She had been taught that American mercy was propaganda, that their Geneva Convention compliance was theater for international observers. Real treatment of prisoners, the Nazi officials assured her, happened behind closed doors where no one could witness. Army medic Corporal David Harris, 31, from Philadelphia, cleaned Elsa's wound with a gentleness that confused her. He worked in silence, applying sulfa powder to prevent infection, wrapping clean white bandages around her leg. The supplies were abundant. No rationing, no shortages. Just professional medical care, administered without hesitation. "She needs antibiotics," Corporal Harris told Sergeant Taylor. "Penicillin, if we have it. This infection could kill her if it spreads." Penicillin. Elsa knew the word. It was the miracle drug that Germany had heard about but rarely possessed. By 1945, German medical supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. Soldiers died from infections that should have been survivable. Civilians received no treatment at all. Yet this American medic spoke of penicillin for a German woman, a civilian enemy, as casually as if discussing aspirin. After treatment, Elsa was moved to a temporary holding area, a large tent divided into sections for female civilians awaiting processing. She expected a prison cell. Instead, she found canvas cots with actual mattresses, wool blankets that were clean and whole, and a wood stove keeping the interior warm against the April chill. 20 other German women occupied the tent, most appearing as shocked as Elsa by their treatment. At noon, American soldiers brought food. Elsa stared at the metal tray placed before her. White bread, real butter. A piece of meat she could not identify but which smelled better than anything she had eaten in years. Vegetable soup that was hot and thick. A cup of coffee, actual coffee, not the acorn substitute Germans had been drinking since 1942. The woman on the cot next to her, Margarete Schmidt, 53, from a village 10 miles north, whispered urgently, "Don't eat it. It's poisoned. They're trying to kill us without wasting bullets." Elsa looked at her tray, then at the guards standing near the entrance. Private Sammy Lewis caught her eye and smiled, a genuine expression without malice or mockery. He made an eating gesture, encouraging her. Elsa's stomach, empty for days, made the decision. She lifted the spoon and tasted the soup. It was not poisoned. It was delicious. She ate slowly at first, then faster, unable to stop herself. The bread was soft and fresh, baked that morning. The butter was real dairy, not the substitute Germans had been using. The meat was actual beef, tender and seasoned. She ate everything, then sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. That evening, more surprises came. The soldiers distributed clean clothes, simple but intact dresses that fit reasonably well. They offered soap for washing. Real soap that produced actual lather, not the gritty substitute Germans manufactured from ashes and animal fat. Buckets of hot water were provided for basic hygiene, and screens gave the women privacy. Elsa watched Private Lewis as he helped an elderly German woman carry her water bucket. He spoke no German, and she spoke no English, but his actions required no translation. He was patient when she moved slowly. He smiled when she thanked him. He treated her with the same respect he might show his own grandmother. This could not be real. Elsa's mind struggled to reconcile what she witnessed with what she had been taught. These black American soldiers, whom Nazi propaganda had portrayed as subhuman savages, were behaving with more humanity than she had seen from her own countrymen in years. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. As darkness fell and the tent grew quiet, Elsa lay on her cot, staring at the canvas ceiling. Her leg no longer throbbed with the same intensity. Her stomach was full for the first time in weeks. She was warm, clean, and safe. None of this made sense. But as she drifted toward sleep, exhausted by fear and confusion, one thought dominated her mind. If they wanted to harm us, they would have done it already. April 24th, 1945. Morning at the Hertzberg processing camp. Elsa woke to sunlight filtering through the canvas tent walls and the unfamiliar sound of American voices speaking calmly outside. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory flooded back, bringing with it all the confusion and fear of the previous day. Corporal William Washington entered the tent carrying a wooden crate filled with supplies. At 28, he had grown up in rural Georgia, where he had learned patience dealing with frightened animals on his family's farm. He approached each woman with the same careful gentleness, speaking slowly in his limited German, using gestures to communicate what words could not. When he reached Elsa's cot, he noticed her trembling. Not from cold, but from residual fear that had not yet released its grip. He set down his crate and pulled out a small wooden cross on a thin chain, worn and clearly personal. He held it out to her, pointing to himself, then to her, making it clear this was a gift, not a requirement. Elsa stared at the cross. In Nazi Germany, Christianity had been twisted and controlled, used as a tool for nationalism and hate. Jews were the designated enemies, and faith became another weapon of division. Yet this black American soldier, whom her government had taught her to consider inferior, was offering her a Christian symbol with obvious personal meaning. She shook her head, trying to refuse, but Corporal Washington gently pressed it into her palm and closed her fingers around it. His smile was warm and understanding. He said something in English she could not understand, but his tone conveyed kindness. Then he moved to the next woman, continuing his rounds. Elsa looked at the cross, running her thumb over the worn wood. This man had carried this through combat. It meant something to him. Yet he gave it to her, a German woman, an enemy civilian who had been raised to hate everything he represented. The gesture was so incomprehensible that Elsa felt tears forming. Later that morning, Corporal Washington returned to help Elsa adjust to camp routine. He showed her where to collect fresh water, where meals were served, where the latrine facilities were located. His patience was extraordinary. When Elsa moved slowly because of her injured leg, he adjusted his pace. When she looked confused by his instructions, he demonstrated instead of speaking. At the water station, Elsa encountered Sergeant Taylor again. He was helping an elderly German man, probably 80 years old, who had been brought in from another village. The old man could barely walk, and Sergeant Taylor supported him with an arm around his shoulders, talking to him gently despite the language barrier. "You speak German well," Elsa said quietly, surprising herself by initiating conversation. Sergeant Taylor turned, his expression brightening. "Some. My grandmother was from Munich. She taught me when I was young." "Why are you doing this?" Elsa asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "We are your enemies. We tried to kill you. Why show us kindness?" Sergeant Taylor considered her question seriously. "Because you're human beings. Because mercy is not weakness. Because treating people with dignity costs nothing and means everything. Because I've been treated poorly in my own country for the color of my skin, and I refuse to become what I hate." His words hung in the air between them. Elsa had never heard anyone speak like this. German officers talked about strength through cruelty, about domination and submission, about racial hierarchies that justified any treatment of those deemed inferior. This American soldier spoke about dignity and mercy as if they were strategic weapons more powerful than bullets. "I don't understand," Elsa whispered. "You will," Sergeant Taylor said gently. "Give it time." That afternoon, when medical staff changed Elsa's bandages, they discovered the infection had already begun to recede. The penicillin was working. Corporal Harris explained through a translator that she would recover fully, that no permanent damage had been done, that she had been lucky they found her when they did. Lucky. Elsa had been captured by the enemy, and it had been lucky. The word felt wrong in her mouth, yet she could not deny the truth of it. If German forces had found her wounded in that cellar, they might have left her to die. Resources were too scarce to waste on civilians. Soldiers came first. The Reich came first. Individual lives meant nothing. But these American soldiers treated her wound as if she mattered, as if her life had value despite her nationality, as if she was worth saving. That evening, as Elsa lay on her cot, fingering the wooden cross Corporal Washington had given her, she experienced something she had not felt in years. Not hope exactly, but the absence of despair. The lightening of a burden she had carried for so long, she forgot it was there. Outside, she heard the American soldiers laughing, their voices carrying through the spring air. Not cruel laughter at prisoners' expense, but genuine joy among men who had found a moment of peace in the middle of war. The sound was so foreign to her experience that she almost did not recognize it. The small kindnesses accumulated like snowfall, each one individually insignificant, but together transforming the landscape of Elsa's understanding. On her third day in the American camp, Private Sammy Lewis noticed she was shivering during the morning meal, despite the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Without a word, he returned 15 minutes later with an extra wool blanket, heavier and warmer than the first. "For you," he said in his broken German, draping it over her shoulders with the same care he might show his own mother. The gesture was so simple, so unremarkable, that it shattered another piece of Elsa's carefully constructed worldview. German soldiers, she had observed throughout the war, rarely showed such consideration even to their own people. Civilians were expected to endure hardship without complaint. Weakness was contempt. Suffering was necessary sacrifice for the greater glory of the Reich. Yet this young American soldier, barely more than a boy, treated a German woman's discomfort as something that mattered. Elsa watched him return to his duties, helping an elderly woman carry her breakfast tray, laughing with his fellow soldiers, treating everyone with the same easy kindness. He came from a nation that had segregated facilities based on skin color she knew from the propaganda. He faced prejudice in his own country. Yet here, thousands of miles from home, he treated German civilians with more dignity than Elsa had seen Germans show each other. That afternoon brought another unexpected moment. During the meal distribution, the server accidentally gave Elsa a double portion of meat. She stared at the 2 pieces on her tray, knowing she should say something, but her hunger made her hesitate. Before she could decide, Sergeant Taylor appeared beside her. "John got a little generous with the servings today," he said with a slight smile. "But you look like you could use it. Enjoy." He moved on before Elsa could respond. The implication was clear. He had seen the mistake. He could have corrected it. Instead, he allowed her to keep the extra food. The camp had enough. 1 additional piece of meat for a malnourished German woman cost nothing and meant everything to her. These small acts multiplied throughout the days. A guard who opened a tent flap when he saw Elsa's hands were full. Another soldier who fixed a broken cot leg without being asked. A medic who checked her wound twice daily instead of the required once. Each gesture chipped away at the ideology that had shaped Elsa's entire adult life. But trust did not come easily. Years of propaganda could not be erased by a few days of kindness. Elsa remained guarded, suspicious, waiting for the cruelty she had been promised would eventually reveal itself. She watched the other German women in the tent, seeing her own confusion reflected in their faces. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand what the Americans wanted, what price would be demanded for this unexpected mercy. Margaret Schmidt, the older woman who had warned about poisoned food, remained convinced this was an elaborate deception. "They're softening us for interrogation," she insisted, "making us grateful so we'll betray information about German positions. This is psychological warfare, nothing more." Her words found fertile ground in Elsa's trained skepticism. Yet the evidence contradicted the theory. No one had interrogated them. No one had asked about military information. The American soldiers seemed genuinely uninterested in extracting intelligence from civilian women who knew nothing of strategic value. On the fourth day, Elsa witnessed something that forced her to confront her internal conflict directly. A German woman, younger than Elsa, perhaps 24 or 25, became hysterical when soldiers approached to change her tent assignment. She screamed and fought, convinced she was being taken somewhere terrible. Private Sammy Lewis backed away immediately, hands raised, giving her space. He called for Sergeant Taylor, who spoke to the woman in calm German, explaining exactly where she was going and why, showing her the new tent location from a distance, letting her see other women already settled there comfortably. The patience was extraordinary. No anger at her outburst, no punishment for her resistance, just understanding that fear made people act irrationally, and the solution was information and reassurance, not force. Elsa felt something shift inside her, a crack in the defensive wall she had built. These men were not pretending. Their kindness was not calculated. They were simply decent human beings treating other human beings with the respect everyone deserved. The simplicity of it was staggering. That night, Elsa dreamed of her sister Lena for the first time in months. April 27th, 1945, 7 days after Elsa's capture. The morning began like others, with breakfast distribution and the now familiar routine of camp life. But as Elsa finished her meal, Sergeant Taylor approached with an expression that made her heart accelerate with unnamed hope. "Elsa Mueller?" he asked formally, though they had spoken many times by now. She nodded, setting down her tin cup. "We've located someone who may be your sister, a woman named Lena Müller, age 24, from your village. She's at a displaced persons camp near Kassel. Does that sound right?" The world stopped. Elsa's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Lena, her baby sister, believed dead for 8 months after an air raid destroyed half their town. Elsa had seen the rubble where Lena's apartment building once stood. She had mourned. She had accepted the loss as one among millions. "She's alive?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "According to the records, yes. She was injured in the bombing but survived. She's been asking about you." Sergeant Taylor pulled out a small notepad. "She said to tell you that the little white dog you both loved as children was named Schneeflock. Does that mean anything to you?" Snowflake, their childhood pet, dead for 15 years. A detail only Lena would know, proof this was not a mistake or cruel trick. Elsa's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the ground, shaking uncontrollably. Tears came in great racking sobs that she could not control and did not try to hide. Sergeant Taylor knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder until the initial storm passed. When Elsa could breathe again, when she could speak, she looked at him with raw desperation. "Can I see her? Please. I'll do anything. I'll tell you anything you want to know. I'll cooperate with any questions. Just please let me see my sister." "We don't want information," Sergeant Taylor said quietly. "And you don't need to bargain. We're working on transportation now. The roads are difficult, and we need proper authorization for civilian movement between sectors. But yes, we're trying to arrange a visit. Give us a few days." The kindness of it broke something fundamental inside Elsa. These men owed her nothing. They had fed her, treated her wounds, protected her safety, and now they were working to reunite her with her sister. They did this not because she had information to trade, not because she had earned it through cooperation, but simply because they understood what family meant. "Why?" Elsa asked, her voice cracking. "Why do this for me? I'm nobody, just another German. We were your enemies. We killed your friends. Why show me this mercy?" Sergeant Taylor was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that demanded honesty. "I grew up in Alabama," he said finally, "the segregated South. I know what it's like to be treated as less than human because of something you can't control. I know what it's like when people judge you by what you are instead of who you are. I won't do that to anyone else, not even my enemies." He stood, offering his hand to help Elsa to her feet. She took it without hesitation, letting him pull her up. "I've seen too much death in this war," he continued. "Too many families torn apart. If I can put one back together, even a German family, even for a little while, then maybe some good can come from all this destruction." Elsa stood facing him, this black American soldier who had every reason to hate Germans, and Germans specifically, who had fought across Europe watching his friends die, who had liberated concentration camps and seen the worst humanity could offer. Yet he chose mercy. He chose compassion. He chose to see her as a person, not as an abstraction representing enemy nationalism. "Thank you," she whispered, inadequate words for overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you for everything." The days that followed passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and continued revelation. Elsa found herself observing the American soldiers with new eyes, no longer looking for the cruelty she expected, but seeing the humanity she had been trained to deny. She watched Corporal Washington teaching a young German boy how to throw an American baseball. She saw Private Lewis sharing his chocolate ration with a group of German children. She observed how the soldiers treated elderly Germans with respect, how they were patient with language barriers, how they shared jokes and laughter even across enemy lines. She began speaking to them more freely, asking questions about America, about their homes, about their families. Corporal Washington showed her a worn photograph of his wife and 2 daughters in Georgia. Private Lewis talked about his mother's cooking and his father's farm in Oklahoma. They were not faceless occupiers. They were sons and husbands and fathers and brothers, human beings with hopes and fears and dreams just like her own. The transformation was not complete. 12 years of Nazi indoctrination could not vanish in a week. But cracks had formed in the ideological armor, and through those cracks, light was beginning to enter. Elsa could feel herself changing, and while change was terrifying, it was also liberating in ways she could not yet fully articulate. On the 5th day after learning about Lena, Sergeant Taylor found Elsa during the afternoon meal. His smile told her everything before he spoke. "Transportation is arranged. Tomorrow morning you'll go to Kassel. You'll see your sister." April 28th, 1945. 8:30 in the morning. The day after learning about Lena. Sergeant Taylor found Elsa standing near the medical tent, uncertain what to do with herself while waiting for tomorrow's transport. The nervous energy radiating from her was visible even from a distance. "Come with me," he said in his Munich-accented German. "Sitting around thinking will make you crazy. Better to stay busy." He led her to a large canvas structure where American soldiers were sorting supplies. Mountains of blankets, clothes, medical supplies, and food rations covered several long tables. The operation was efficient, but clearly needed more hands. Corporal Washington was already there, organizing stacks of wool blankets by size and condition. "We need help cataloging supplies for displaced persons," Sergeant Taylor explained. "Simple work, Folding, sorting, making lists, nothing complicated, but it helps people, and it might help you pass the time. Interested? Elsa nodded, grateful for something to occupy her mind. The thought of seeing Lena tomorrow filled her with such intense emotion that she needed distraction. Fear and hope warred inside her. What if the records were wrong? What if Lena was too injured, too traumatized, too changed by the war? What if 8 months apart had created a distance that could not be bridged? Corporal Washington showed her the sorting system. Blankets in good condition went in one pile. Those needing minor repairs went in another. Severely damaged items were set aside for salvage. The work was meditative, requiring attention but not complex thought. Perfect for a mind that needed to quiet itself. As Elsa worked, she observed the American soldiers around her. Private Lewis arrived carrying boxes of canned food, setting them down with exaggerated groans about their weight, making the other soldiers laugh. A young private, whose name she did not know, sang quietly while organizing medical supplies, his voice pleasant and unself-conscious. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost casual. Nothing like the rigid military discipline she had witnessed in German forces. "Your sister will be happy to see you," Corporal Washington said in his halting German, noticing Elsa's distracted expression. He pulled out the photograph he had shown her before, the one with his wife and daughters. "I have not seen them in 2 years. When war ends, we go home. You will have your sister tomorrow. This is good." His broken German made the sentiment more powerful somehow. The effort he put into communicating across the language barrier. Elsa found herself smiling, a genuine expression that felt strange on her face after so many months of fear and grief. Lunch was brought to the supply tent so work could continue. Private Lewis sat beside Elsa, sharing his chocolate ration bar with her, without asking if she wanted it, simply breaking it in half and placing her portion on her knee. The casual generosity no longer shocked her. She was beginning to understand that this was simply who these men were. "Oklahoma," Sammy said, pointing to himself, trying to explain where he came from. He drew a crude map in the dust on the table, showing the vastness of America, the distance he had traveled to reach this moment in a German supply tent. Farm. Wheat. He made gestures of planting and harvesting, his face animated with homesickness. Elsa tried to imagine this young man's life before the war, rising at dawn to work fields that stretched to the horizon, a family waiting for news from Europe, a mother who prayed every night for her son's safe return. He was not a faceless soldier representing American military might. He was Sammy from Oklahoma, who missed his family's farm and shared his chocolate with a German woman. The afternoon passed in this strange new rhythm of work and casual conversation. Sergeant Taylor taught her some English words. Corporal Washington showed her photographs of Georgia, his rural hometown that looked surprisingly similar to parts of Germany she had known. Private Lewis made everyone laugh with his attempts to communicate using elaborate hand gestures when words failed. As evening approached and the work slowed, Elsa realized something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer a prisoner being guarded by enemies. She was a person working alongside other people, all of them caught in the machinery of war, all of them hoping for its end, all of them fundamentally similar, despite the uniforms and flags that supposedly divided them. That night, Elsa slept deeply for the first time since the war began, dreaming of Lena and wheat fields and chocolate bars and the possibility of peace. April 29th, 1945. The morning Elsa would see her sister. She woke before dawn, unable to sleep, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The drive to Kassel would take several hours. Sergeant Taylor had arranged for her to travel in a supply truck, making the journey to deliver goods to the displaced persons camp where Lena was staying. Breakfast that morning tasted like nothing. Elsa forced herself to eat, knowing she needed strength, but her stomach was tight with nervous energy. Private Lewis noticed her barely touching her food and sat down across from her. his youthful face serious with concern. "Your sister," he said in his broken German, making a gesture of two people hugging. "Happy. Today, happy." His simple words and genuine smile helped calm her nerves. Over the past week, Sammy had become a bridge between Elsa's fear and hope. His uncomplicated kindness, his inability to see people as enemies, his fundamental decency had been the first crack in her ideological armor. Now, sitting across from him, she understood that he represented something she had never encountered in Nazi Germany: the possibility of goodness without agenda. "Thank you," she said in careful English, one of the phrases Sergeant Taylor had taught her. "You are kind." Sammy's face lit up with pleasure at hearing her speak English. "You learn fast," he said, then added in German, "Maybe someday you visit Oklahoma. See the farm?" The idea seemed absurd. A German woman visiting America, an enemy visiting the country she had been taught to hate. Yet sitting there in the morning light, sharing a meal with this young soldier who treated her like a friend, the idea did not seem impossible, just unlikely. The difference mattered. Corporal Washington joined them, bringing extra coffee he had somehow acquired. "Big day," he said. "You are ready?" Elsa nodded, though she was not sure if ready was the right word. Terrified seemed more accurate, hopeful, desperate. All these emotions swirled inside her like a storm. 8 months of believing Lena was dead. 8 months of grief and guilt and loneliness. And now, today, possibly the end of that suffering. At 9 o'clock, Sergeant Taylor appeared with a canvas bag. "For your sister," he explained, opening it to show what was inside. Chocolate bars, canned fruit, medical supplies, soap, clean clothes. From the men, they wanted her to have something. Elsa stared at the bag, overwhelmed. These American soldiers who owed her nothing, who had every reason to feel nothing but hostility toward Germans, had contributed from their own rations to help a woman they had never met. Because she was Elsa's sister. Because family mattered. Because kindness was not rationed like food or fuel. "I cannot repay this," Elsa whispered. "Not supposed to repay kindness," Sergeant Taylor said gently. "That is what makes it kindness." The drive to Kassel revealed a Germany that Elsa barely recognized. The countryside was scarred by war. Burned-out tanks sat beside roads. Villages were reduced to rubble. German civilians, hollow-eyed and defeated, walked along the highways carrying what remained of their possessions. American military convoys moved in the opposite direction, an endless stream of trucks and jeeps and supplies that seemed to have no end. The contrast was staggering. Germany was destroyed, starving, finished. America was abundant, organized, unstoppable. The lesson was visible in every mile they traveled. This was what happened when industrial capacity met ideological delusion. This was the price of believing propaganda over reality. At the displaced persons camp near Kassel, chaos reigned. Thousands of people from dozens of countries, all displaced by war, all searching for lost family members, all trying to survive in a world that had been shattered. Red Cross workers moved through the crowds with clipboards and translators, trying to bring order to catastrophe. Sergeant Taylor led Elsa through the confusion, his uniform opening paths through the crowds. At the registration tent, he spoke with an American officer, showing papers, explaining the situation. The officer made a phone call, spoke in rapid English, then nodded. "Section 7, he said. "Tent 42. She's expecting you." Elsa's legs moved on their own, carrying her through the camp. She barely registered the faces around her. Her entire world had narrowed to a single tent, a single possibility, a single hope that had sustained her through the darkest hours of her captivity. And then she was there. Tent 42. Canvas walls that represented 8 months of separation, 8 months of grief, 8 months of believing she was alone. Sergeant Taylor gently touched her shoulder. "I will wait here. Take all the time you need." Elsa pushed aside the tent flap and stepped inside. A woman stood near the back, her face turned toward the entrance, 24 years old, thinner than Elsa remembered, a scar on her left cheek that had not been there before, but unmistakably, impossibly, miraculously alive. "Lena," Elsa whispered. Her sister's face crumpled, and she ran forward. The sisters collided in an embrace that hurt and healed simultaneously, both of them sobbing, both of them speaking over each other, words tumbling out in a desperate need to prove this moment was real. May 1st, 1945. 3 days after the reunion with Lena. Elsa had returned to Hertzberg camp with her sister, the American soldiers arranging for Lena to be transferred to the same facility so the sisters could remain together. The reunion had transformed something fundamental in Elsa. The last wall around her heart had crumbled when she held Lena again, and with that wall's collapse came a flood of emotions she had suppressed for years. Lena adapted to the camp more easily than Elsa had. At 24, she possessed less rigid ideology, less deeply ingrained propaganda. She accepted the Americans' kindness with gratitude rather than suspicion. She laughed at Private Lewis's jokes, even when she did not fully understand the English words. She helped Corporal Washington teach Elsa more English phrases. She represented what Germany might become if it could shed the poison of Nazi doctrine. That morning, as the sisters helped sort supplies alongside the American soldiers, a disturbance erupted near the camp entrance. A German officer, still wearing his Wehrmacht uniform despite being a prisoner of war himself, strode through the gate surrounded by guards. Hauptmann Klaus Weber, 43 years old, former commander of a Wehrmacht supply unit, had been captured 2 weeks earlier. His bearing remained rigid with military pride despite defeat. Weber surveyed the camp with obvious disgust. German civilians working alongside American soldiers, women laughing with enemy troops, the casual integration that violated everything the Wehrmacht had taught about proper military discipline and racial hierarchy. His face twisted with anger. "This is collaboration," he announced loudly in German, his voice carrying across the camp. "Fraternization with the enemy. You shame Germany. You betray the fatherland." His eyes locked on Elsa, who stood beside Sergeant Taylor, both of them folding blankets. The sight of a German woman working so comfortably with a black American soldier seemed to enrage him beyond reason. "You!" Weber spat, advancing toward Elsa. "Have you no pride? No dignity? Your country is defeated and you smile with the enemy like a common whore." The American guards moved to intercept, but Sergeant Taylor raised his hand, stepping forward to place himself between Weber and Elsa. His movement was calm, but deliberate, creating a physical barrier. "That is enough," Sergeant Taylor said in perfect German, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his relatively junior rank. "You will not speak to civilians that way. You will not insult anyone under American protection. You will return to the prisoners of war section immediately." Weber laughed bitterly. "A Negro giving orders to a German officer. The world has gone mad. This is what we fought against. This degradation. This mixing of races that should remain separate." Corporal Washington and Private Lewis moved to flank Sergeant Taylor, creating a protective wall around Elsa and Lena. The other American soldiers in the area stopped their work, their expressions hardening. They had heard this rhetoric before. They had fought against the ideology Weber represented. They would not tolerate it now. "Your ideology lost," Sergeant Taylor said quietly, but his words carried steel underneath. Your 1,000-year Reich lasted 12 years. Your superior race was defeated by the soldiers you deemed inferior. Your beliefs are ashes. The only thing you have left is the choice of how you behave in defeat. Right now, you are choosing poorly. The guards moved forward, firmly but not roughly taking Weber's arms. As they escorted him away, he continued shouting, his words growing more desperate as distance increased. Accusations of betrayal, warnings about the corruption of German racial purity. The same propaganda that had poisoned an entire nation, now reduced to the impotent rage of a defeated man. Elsa stood trembling, not from fear of Weber, but from the sudden crystallization of understanding. Sergeant Taylor had protected her. He and his fellow soldiers had formed a barrier between her and a German officer, their own countryman, defending her safety and dignity against someone who shared her nationality and language. The symbolism was overwhelming. "Are you all right?" Sergeant Taylor asked, turning to face her. Elsa could not speak. Tears streamed down her face as the full weight of the past 10 days finally broke through. These men, whom she had been taught to fear and hate, had shown her more humanity than her own people. They had healed her wounds, fed her, reunited her with her sister, and now defended her against the very ideology that had shaped her entire life. "You stood in front of me," she finally managed to say. "You protected me from him." "Of course," Sergeant Taylor said simply. "That is what decent people do." Those words, so simple and profound, captured everything Elsa had learned. Decency was not about nationality or race or ideology. It was about how you treated people when you had the power to harm them. It was about choosing mercy when cruelty would be easier. It was about seeing humanity in everyone, even former enemies. Lena put her arm around her sister, as Elsa wept. Private Lewis awkwardly offered his handkerchief. Corporal Washington stood nearby, his presence solid and comforting. These American soldiers, these men who had every reason to hate Germans, instead offered compassion. "They are better than us," Elsa whispered to Lena. "These Americans we were told were inferior. They are better than we ever were." That night, the camp held what the soldiers called a community dinner. The Americans had organized it to build connections between the soldiers and the German civilians under their care. Long tables were set up outside. Food was shared. Someone produced a harmonica and played music that transcended language. Children played games taught to them by American soldiers. Elsa sat with Lena, Sergeant Taylor, Corporal Washington, and Private Lewis. They ate together, this strange family forged by war. And for the first time since 1933, when the Nazis took power, Elsa felt hope that Germany might someday heal. May 4th, 1945. Elsa woke to the sound of rain against the canvas tent, a steady rhythm that had continued through the night. The camp was quieter than usual, most outdoor activities suspended until the weather cleared. She lay on her cot, listening to Lena breathing softly beside her, grateful for her sister's presence, but troubled by thoughts that had kept her awake long into the night. The previous evening, Elsa had been returning from the latrine when she overheard a conversation between American soldiers standing under an awning, seeking shelter from the rain. They spoke in English, not knowing she was near enough to hear, not knowing she had been learning the language from Sergeant Taylor. Her understanding was imperfect, but good enough to catch the meaning of their words. "Hamburg is gone," one soldier said. "Cologne, Dresden, Berlin, all rubble. My cousin was in the 8th Air Force. He said you could see the fires from 100 miles away." "Good," another voice responded. "They started this war. They burned London. They killed millions. They built death camps. Let them taste what they dished out." "Still," a third soldier said, his voice troubled. "Women and children died in those bombings. People who never voted for Hitler. People who had no choice. Does that make us as bad as them?" "War is war," the second voice said. They sowed the wind. Now they reap the whirlwind. I don't lose sleep over dead Germans, not after what we found at those camps." The conversation continued, but Elsa had heard enough. She returned to the tent, her mind reeling. The Americans were right, of course. Germany had started the war. German forces had committed unspeakable atrocities. The concentration camps, rumors of which had circulated even during the war, were real. The systematic murder of millions. The industrial-scale evil that Germany had perpetrated in the name of racial purity. Now, lying in the gray morning light, Elsa wrestled with impossible contradictions. The American soldiers in this camp treated her with kindness and dignity. But other American soldiers, perhaps including some stationed here, had bombed German cities, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Both actions were morally defensible from their own perspectives. Germany had unleashed hell on the world. America had responded with overwhelming force. Where did that leave her? She had not voted for Hitler. She had not built the camps. She had not invaded Poland or France or Russia. But she had believed the propaganda. She had accepted the explanations about Germany's enemies. She had remained silent when Jewish neighbors disappeared. She had been complicit through passivity, if not active participation. Lena woke and immediately noticed Elsa's troubled expression. "What is wrong?" Elsa explained what she had overheard. Lena listened quietly, her face growing grave. "We knew cities were being bombed," Lena said finally. "We saw the refugees flooding east and west, trying to escape the destruction. Mother and father died in Hamburg. We are victims too." "But are we innocent victims?" Elsa asked. "Or are we reaping what we sowed? These Americans treat us kindly, but do we deserve their kindness? Should they hate us instead?" The question hung in the air between them. It was too large, too complex, too tangled in questions of collective guilt and individual responsibility. Germany had committed evil on an unprecedented scale. Did that mean every German was evil? Or could individuals be separated from the sins of their nation? At breakfast, Elsa found herself unable to meet Sergeant Taylor's eyes. The kindness he showed her now felt like something she did not deserve. Her country had started a war that killed 60 million people. Her government had systematically murdered millions in death camps. What right did she have to accept chocolate bars and warm blankets from soldiers whose countrymen she had supported? Sergeant Taylor noticed her withdrawal immediately. He sat down beside her, his expression concerned. "Something is bothering you." Elsa explained what she had overheard, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can you be kind to us? After everything Germany has done, after the camps, after the war, how can you see us as anything but monsters?" Sergeant Taylor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were measured and careful. "I will not lie to you. What Germany did was evil. The camps were evil. The war was evil. Starting that war, pursuing that ideology, those were crimes against humanity. And yes, German people bear responsibility for allowing it to happen, for supporting it, for participating in it." Elsa felt tears beginning to form. This was the condemnation she had been waiting for, the judgment she deserved. "But," Sergeant Taylor continued, "I refuse to believe that evil is permanent. I refuse to believe that people cannot change, cannot learn, cannot be redeemed. You were raised in a system that taught you hatred and lies. You believed those lies because you knew nothing else. Now you know better. Now you have a choice. You can carry the guilt forever and let it destroy you. Or you can accept responsibility, commit to being better, and help build a Germany that never makes these mistakes again." "How do I deserve your kindness?" Elsa asked. "You do not have to deserve kindness," Sergeant Taylor said gently. "That is the point. Mercy is not something you earn. If you had to earn it, it would not be mercy." His words echoed through Elsa's mind as the day progressed. She watched him treat other German civilians with the same patience and dignity. She saw Corporal Washington playing with German children as if they were his own. She observed Private Lewis sharing his lunch with an elderly German woman who reminded him of his grandmother. These American soldiers had chosen mercy over vengeance. They had chosen to see individuals rather than abstractions. They had chosen to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm. May 7th, 1945. The morning radio announcement crackled through the camp's loudspeakers. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Around Elsa, German civilians received the news with mixed emotions. Relief that the fighting had ended. Grief for what had been lost. Shame for what their nation had become. Uncertainty about what would come next. Elsa stood beside Lena near the camp perimeter, watching American soldiers celebrate in the distance. Their joy was understandable. They could go home now. They had survived. They had won. Yet even in their celebration, Elsa noticed they remained professional with the German civilians in their care. No cruelty, no revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of men who had done their duty. "The war is over," Lena said softly. "We survived." "Germany did not," Elsa replied. "The country we knew is gone." They stood in silence, processing what the surrender meant. The Nazi government was finished. Hitler was reportedly dead. The Thousand-Year Reich had collapsed after 12 years. Everything Germans had been told about their inevitable victory, their racial superiority, their destiny to rule Europe, all of it had been lies. Sergeant Taylor approached the sisters, his expression serious. "I wanted to tell you in person before you heard it elsewhere. The reports from the concentration camps are confirmed. Millions murdered. The worst humanity is capable of. We liberated several camps. I was there. I saw it." His voice carried the weight of witnessing atrocity beyond words. Elsa felt her stomach turn. She had heard whispers during the war, rumors about camps in the East, stories quickly silenced by authorities. But hearing it confirmed by someone she trusted made it undeniably real. "How many?" Lena whispered. "Millions. Jews, Roma, political prisoners, disabled people, anyone the Nazis deemed unworthy of life. Systematic murder on an industrial scale." Sergeant Taylor paused, his dark eyes holding both sisters in his gaze. "This is what Germany did. This is what the ideology you were taught led to. This is the truth you must face if you are to build something better." Elsa felt the full weight of Germany's sins settle on her shoulders. She had not personally killed anyone. She had not built the camps. But she had remained silent. She had accepted the propaganda. She had been part of the system that made such evil possible. "I did not know," she said, though the words felt like a weak excuse. "We did not know." "Some did not know," Sergeant Taylor said gently but firmly. "Some chose not to know. Some knew and did nothing. The question now is not what you knew then. The question is what you will do with the knowledge now." Before Elsa could respond, a commotion erupted near the camp entrance. A convoy of trucks had arrived carrying more displaced persons from camps throughout the region. American soldiers were helping people disembark, processing paperwork, directing traffic through the chaos. The war might be over, but its aftermath would continue for years. Private Lewis appeared, jogging toward them with his characteristic energy. "Sergeant Taylor, sir. There is someone asking for Elsa Müller. Says they are family." Elsa's heart stopped. Lena was already here. Their parents were dead. Their brother had died on the Eastern Front 3 years earlier. Who else could be looking for her? She followed Private Lewis through the camp, Lena and Sergeant Taylor close behind. At the processing tent, a woman stood arguing with an American officer in broken English. She was perhaps 50 years old, thin from deprivation, her clothes patched and worn. When she turned and saw Elsa, her face transformed with joy and relief. Aunt Gerda? Elsa could barely believe what she was seeing. Her father's sister, who had lived in Dresden, whom they had believed dead after the terrible bombing in February. Aunt Gerda rushed forward, embracing both nieces with fierce strength. She was crying and laughing simultaneously, speaking too fast to be understood, her hands touching their faces as if to confirm they were real. "I thought you were dead," Gerda said finally. "I thought everyone was dead. The letters stopped. The city was destroyed. I had no way to find out what happened to you. Then I heard the Americans were registering displaced persons. I gave them your names. And here you are. Here you are." The reunion happened in waves. More tears. More explanations. Gerda had survived the Dresden, to the Eiser bombing by luck, having been visiting friends in the suburbs when the attack came. She had spent the last 3 months searching for family members, moving from camp to camp, following rumors and thin leads. The American registration system, organized and thorough, had finally connected her with her nieces. As the family stood together, 3 survivors of Germany's destruction, Elsa felt something shift inside her. The guilt remained. The shame of what Germany had done would not disappear. But alongside those heavy emotions came something lighter. Hope. Family. The possibility of rebuilding. Sergeant Taylor watched from a respectful distance, allowing the reunion its private moments. When Elsa caught his eye, she mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." He nodded, understanding all that those words contained. Thanks for the medical care, for the food, for reuniting her with Lena, for arranging Aunt Gerda's transfer to this camp, for showing mercy when vengeance would have been justified, for treating German civilians with dignity when they had done nothing to earn it. That evening, as the 3 women sat together in the tent, sharing stories of survival and loss, Elsa understood that this was what peace would look like. Not the absence of conflict, but the slow reconstruction of human connections across the ruins of hatred. Not forgetting what happened, but learning from it. Not denying guilt, but transforming it into commitment to build something better. May 10th, 1945. 3 days after Germany's surrender. The spring sunshine was warm on Elsa's face as she stood outside the camp headquarters building, waiting for her name to be called for processing. The war was over, and the American military was beginning the massive task of returning German civilians to whatever homes remained, or finding new places for those whose homes had been destroyed. Elsa, Lena, and Aunt Gerda would be transported to a displaced persons camp near Frankfurt, closer to what remained of their home region. The Americans had arranged everything with their characteristic efficiency: transportation, temporary housing, food supplies, even a letter of introduction to the civilian authorities who would help them rebuild their lives. But before leaving Hertzberg, Elsa had requested one final meeting. She needed to say goodbye properly. She needed these American soldiers to understand what their kindness had meant. She needed to find words adequate for a transformation that had saved not just her life, but her soul. Sergeant Taylor appeared at the headquarters door, gesturing for her to enter. Inside, Corporal Washington and Private Lewis waited, along with several other soldiers who had helped care for the German civilians over the past weeks. The informal gathering felt appropriate. These men who had treated her as a human being when they could have treated her as an enemy. "I wanted to thank you," Elsa began in her improving English, then switched to German when her vocabulary failed her. Sergeant Taylor would translate for the others. "When you found me in that cellar, I was certain you would hurt me. Everything I had been taught, everything I believed, told me that American soldiers were monsters. Black American soldiers especially. The propaganda filled our heads with lies about what you would do to German women." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The soldiers listened with quiet attention. "You gave me water instead of cruelty. medical care instead of punishment, food instead of starvation. You reunited me with my sister when you had no obligation to help. You protected me from a German officer who wanted to shame me. You treated me like I mattered, like my life had value, even though my country had tried to destroy yours." Private Lewis looked uncomfortable with the praise, shuffling his feet. Corporal Washington's expression was thoughtful. Sergeant Taylor simply listened, letting her speak. "I want you to understand what you did," Elsa continued. "You did not just save my life. You saved me from the hatred I had been taught. Every day in this camp, I watched you treat German civilians with dignity. I saw you playing with German children. I watched you help elderly Germans who could not help themselves. I saw you share your food, your medicine, your time, not because you had to, but because you chose to." She felt tears forming, but did not try to stop them. "You showed me what my government never could. That strength is not cruelty. That victory is not vengeance. That true power is choosing mercy when you could choose harm. You proved that everything I was taught about racial superiority was a lie. You, whom Nazi propaganda called inferior, demonstrated more humanity than any German officer I ever encountered." Sergeant Taylor translated her words for the others. Private Lewis wiped at his eyes. Corporal Washington nodded slowly, his expression moved but not surprised. These men knew what they had done. They had chosen it deliberately, as an act of resistance against the very hatred they had been fighting. "I cannot undo what Germany did," Elsa said. "I cannot bring back the millions who were murdered. I cannot erase the evil my nation committed. I will carry the shame of that evil for the rest of my life. But I can promise you this. I will remember what you taught me. I will teach my children, if I am blessed to have any, that hatred is a poison, that kindness is strength, that all people deserve dignity regardless of their race or nationality." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the wooden cross Corporal Washington had given her that first week. "I will keep this always, not just as a religious symbol, but as a reminder. A reminder that when I was at my lowest, when I expected only cruelty, a Black American soldier gave me his most precious possession. That act of grace changed everything." Corporal Washington stepped forward and gently closed Elsa's fingers around the cross. "You keep it," he said in his halting German. "Remember, tell others, build better Germany." The simplicity of his words captured everything. Remember what happened. Learn from it. Build something better from the ruins. It was a call to action, not just for Elsa, but for all of Germany. The question was whether enough Germans would answer that call. Sergeant Taylor spoke then, his voice carrying the wisdom that came from facing his own nation's failures regarding race. "Germany will have to confront what it did. Americans are confronting what we have done to our own black citizens. No nation is innocent. The difference is whether you learn from your sins or repeat them. You have a choice. Choose wisely." The meeting ended with handshakes and final goodbyes. Private Lewis gave Elsa a chocolate bar for the journey, making her promise to share it with Lena and Aunt Gerda. Corporal Washington gave her a piece of paper with his address in Georgia, telling her to write if she ever needed help. Sergeant Taylor simply held her hand for a moment, his grip warm and firm, his eyes conveying understanding that transcended words. As Elsa walked back to the tent to collect her few belongings, she felt transformed in ways she could not fully articulate. The woman who had screamed, "Don't drag me away," when American soldiers tried to help her no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood that enemies could become friends, that hatred could be healed, that mercy was the most powerful weapon humanity possessed. The next morning, as the truck carried Elsa, Lena, and Aunt Gerda toward Frankfurt, Elsa turned to watch Hertzberg camp disappear behind them. Somewhere in that collection of canvas tents, American soldiers were continuing their work, treating German civilians with the same dignity they had shown her. Building peace, one act of kindness at a time. May 15th, 1945, 7:30 in the morning. The displaced persons camp near Frankfurt, Germany. Elsa stood at the window of the temporary barracks she shared with Lena and Aunt Gerda, watching the morning sun illuminate a city that had been reduced to rubble. Frankfurt was a skeleton of its former self. Buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky. Streets were canyons carved through mountains of debris. Yet somewhere in this devastation, life was beginning again. 3 weeks had passed since leaving Hertzberg. 3 weeks since saying goodbye to Sergeant Taylor, Corporal Washington, and Private Lewis. 3 weeks of processing what had happened to her in that American camp. The transformation was not complete. She suspected it would take years, perhaps a lifetime, to fully understand how profoundly those days had changed her. The displaced persons camp housed over 2,000 Germans, all of them waiting for answers about what came next. Some had homes to return to if the structures still stood. Others, like Elsa and her family, faced the task of building new lives from nothing. American military administered the camp with the same efficiency and humanity she had witnessed at Hertzberg. Food was adequate, medical care was available. No one was mistreated. But this camp lacked the personal connections she had formed with the soldiers who rescued her. These American personnel were professional and kind, but they were not Sergeant Taylor explaining why mercy mattered. They were not Private Lewis sharing his chocolate with a smile that transcended language barriers. They were not Corporal Washington offering his most precious possession to comfort a frightened enemy. Elsa touched the wooden cross hanging around her neck. She had not removed it since Corporal Washington gave it to her. It had become more than a religious symbol. It was a reminder of the moment when an American soldier chose to see her humanity rather than her nationality. A reminder that redemption was possible even after the worst evil imaginable. Lena joined her at the window, slipping her arm through Elsa's. At 24, her sister possessed a resilience that amazed Elsa. Lena had survived the Hamburg bombing, 8 months of believing her family was dead, and countless hardships during Germany's collapse. Yet she faced the future with hope rather than despair. Aunt Gerda found work, Lena announced, helping with the camp kitchen. They need people who can organize food distribution. She starts tomorrow. Work was dignity. Work was purpose. Work was the first step toward rebuilding. Elsa had registered for a teaching position, hoping to help educate German children in a new way. A way that emphasized critical thinking rather than blind obedience. A way that taught the value of all human life, regardless of race or religion. A way that would prevent another generation from falling into the trap of hatred that had destroyed Germany. The irony was not lost on her. She had been educated in Nazi schools. She had absorbed their propaganda. She had believed their lies about racial superiority and Germany's destiny. Now she would teach children to question authority, to think independently, to recognize propaganda when they encountered it. The best way to honor what Sergeant Taylor and his fellow soldiers had taught her was to pass those lessons forward. That afternoon, a Red Cross worker brought mail distribution to the barracks. Elsa was surprised to receive an envelope with American postage. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single page written in careful English, with German translations provided in parentheses. "Dear Miss Müller," the letter began. It was from Sergeant Taylor. He wrote about returning to his unit, about the continuing work of helping German civilians, about his hope to return home to Alabama soon. But the final paragraph made tears stream down Elsa's face. "You asked how we could show you kindness after everything Germany did. I have thought about your question often. The answer is simple. We chose to see the person, rather, than the enemy. We chose mercy because cruelty would have made us no better than those we fought against. We chose to believe that people can change, that hatred can be healed, that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. You proved we were right to believe these things. Carry that belief forward. Teach it to others. Build a Germany worthy of the peace so many died to achieve. Elsa read the letter 3 times, memorizing every word. Then she carefully folded it and placed it in the small wooden box where she kept her most precious possessions. The letter, the wooden cross, a photograph of her family taken before the war when they were whole and happy and ignorant of what was coming. That evening, as Elsa helped Aunt Gerda prepare dinner in their small corner of the barracks, a young German woman approached. She was perhaps 19, hollow-eyed and frightened. She had just arrived at the camp after walking for 2 weeks from Berlin. "I heard you speak English," the young woman said hesitantly. "I heard you were kind. I need help understanding what the Americans want me to do. I am so afraid." Elsa saw herself in this young woman's fear. She remembered hiding in a cellar, certain the Americans would harm her. She remembered screaming, "Don't drag me away," when soldiers tried to help. She remembered the terror born of propaganda and lies. "Sit down," Elsa said gently, gesturing to a chair. "Let me tell you about the American soldiers who saved my life. Let me tell you that you are safe here. Let me tell you that everything we were taught was wrong, and that is actually good news because it means the future can be different from the past." As Elsa spoke, sharing her story with this frightened young woman, she understood what Sergeant Taylor meant. Change began with one person choosing differently, one act of kindness creating ripples, one story told and retold until it became part of collective memory. The war had destroyed Germany, but in that destruction lay the possibility of building something better, something founded on human dignity rather than racial hatred, something that valued mercy over cruelty, something that recognized the humanity in everyone, regardless of their nationality or skin color. Elsa could not undo the past. She could not bring back the millions murdered in death camps. She could not rebuild the cities reduced to rubble. But she could carry forward the lessons taught by Black American soldiers who chose mercy when vengeance would have been justified. She could teach those lessons to others. She could help build a Germany worthy of the second chance it had been given. As night fell over Frankfurt's ruins, Elsa touched the wooden cross around her neck and made a silent promise. She would remember. She would honor the kindness shown to her by never forgetting what hatred had cost. She would spend the rest of her life ensuring that the evil Germany had committed would never be repeated. The woman who had screamed, "Don't drag me," away, no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood that being dragged from darkness into light, even when frightening, was the greatest mercy she could have received. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.